All right, so it's time that we had a long overdue heart-to-heart on why your drums feel so flat, even though they might be loud. So you have to remember that loudness doesn't take into account depth. So the problem is why your drums feel flat is because they all exist on the same depth plane. Yeah, plane. So this is the problem that most producers will make when they're starting out, is they'll think that to have punchy and aggressive drums, that they have to make every drum layer count, and they have to push every drum layer forward. So what you end up with is basically a 2D wall of attack. And the thing that you need to realize is that aggressive drums are built with contrast being part of them. So, even you want the loudest, most smacking, most punchiest drums that you can possibly make, and aggressive drums that you can possibly make. By creating a 2D wall of sound, you just invoke ear fatigue, and you don't actually get that aggressive sound that you're actually after. So even the most aggressive drum sound makes use of contrast, and that is to say the contrast in the depth between the drum elements. So you have to think of your drums not as one group that's just everything up front, but you have to think of your drums as a system. So it's a system of sounds that works together to create impact through the contrast that exists within them. Okay? And what you need to do is you need to focus entirely on depth planes. You need to focus almost zero attention on volume and metering, and you need to focus 99% of your attention on depth planes. This is the biggest thing that producers fail to realize. So they'll be obsessed with LUFS, they'll be obsessed with numbers, readouts, loudness, but they won't be obsessed with depth planes, which is actually where everything, all the impact comes from. So you have to have sounds that exist with the intention of them being weak, so that other sounds by contrast appear powerful. So you have to create a hierarchy of sounds within your drum group, and that is what's going to give you a drum group that sounds not only loud but also has impact. Because a loud drum group that's flat has no impact, it just causes ear fatigue. Okay? Because the human brain needs contrasts to understand aggression and impact. It's like, imagine a character from a movie that was constantly aggressive for the entire scene, was just literally just punching and fighting and kicking like non-stop for the whole scene. Well, that wouldn't be as impactful and aggressive as a character who was really silent, who didn't move, and then suddenly just struck out of nowhere, and then suddenly had this sort of aggressive moment. That that would be a lot more impactful, and that would wake your brain up and give you a bit of a shock, because it's the contrast between the character being previously docile and then suddenly snapping into aggression. And so it's the same thing with building a drum group. It's that you need those parts of the drum group which are almost doing nothing. And so how you do that is you create a system rather than just, every sound forward, every sound 2D attacking you. You create a system, so some sounds are up front and attacking you. Some sounds are just in the middle that are kind of gluing things together. And some sounds, these are the key sounds that producers miss, are the sounds that are right at the back, that are really, really subtle, that are setting things up to provide then that contrast. So simple for drum and bass, for example, a really punchy kick drum with a good transient on and a punchy snare drum with a good transient on, that's up the front. Then maybe some groovy hi-hats with a little bit of a softer transient, but still, you can still kind of hear, the transient to somewhat extent. They're like kind of in the middle, kind of gluing everything together with the groove. And then right at the back, you've got these sort of tails of reverb. You've got some sort of really light, splashy white noise and cymbal rides that are really, really low in the mix. Think minus 30 dB, like really, really at the back of the room. And that's just a few examples of, 3 different depth planes that you can, think about. And then any other sounds you use in your drum group, you always have to decide where in the depth plane it's going to sit. And so the goal is that you create different depth planes for the different sounds. You have some at the front, some in the middle, and some at the back. And you can switch up, things that are sitting at the back or things that are sitting in the middle. You can choose what you want to put there, but the purpose is that you just have that structure set up. So no matter which sounds you end up using, that's actually not as important as the fact that you have built the system of depth. So the system of depth is what you need to focus on building when you're creating drums, and that is going to give you fullness, drums with dimension, a 3D sound, drums with impact, drums with contrast, drums with aggression. It all comes from setting up a system of depth. Okay, so do that, and then once that system of depth is in place, you will be able to still push the drums just as loud, but because they have that depth system within them now, they won't just feel loud and flat, they'll feel loud and dynamic. They'll feel loud with dimension, because loudness and dimension, dimensional drums and loud drums are 2 different things. You can have both, but you have to set up that system first. So set up the system as the primary thing that you do, because that's the thing that people often miss out. And the best drums will have that really well chosen sound selection for the background, really well sound selection for the middle ground, and a really nice sound selection for the foreground. But yeah, without that system of depth, with the different depth planes, it will just fall flat every time. All right. And one bonus thing to think about is compression and limiting. This is why I always preach, don't compress your drums, don't limit your drums, because what compression or limiting does is changes the dynamic structure of the sound, right? So if you're spending all this time creating this dynamic setup where you've got different depth planes, as soon as you put a compressor on or a limiter on, it's going to adjust all of that. So if you put a compressor on, it's going to bring the sounds that are at the forefront, it's going to push them further back, because it takes the loud peaks and brings them down. So by compressing the whole drum group, you'll weaken the foreground sounds. Okay, you can use compression on individual sounds to push them back, but not on the whole group, ideally. So the sounds that are in the middle ground or the background, you can use compression on those to put them in that spot, but you don't want to do it in the whole group, because then you're taking the foreground and pushing it back. So that's why you wouldn't want to compress on the whole thing. And the same with limiting, it's kind of in reverse. Limiting, you'll bring up the tails. You'll bring the tails further forward, So the sounds that are right at the back of the room, that you've intentionally set them low so that they create the contrast, so that these low background sounds exist to give, more of a priority to the things that are at the front, which are more important for the power and the loudness. if you then limit the whole drum group, those things that you've intentionally placed in the background now suddenly get brought up in the mix and brought more towards the middle ground, and then you lose that range of depth that you've been creating. Okay, so limiting and compression, they are, perhaps the limiting, by how it works, it'll make it louder, but it will change the actual depth plane structure that you've built. So the idea is not to do that. Okay, the idea is to focus on getting that really wide separation between the depth planes, as I mentioned, and then you can just use the clipper to gain up the volume of the whole drums to get it to the right spot that you need. You don't need to do you don't need to compress and limit to bring up the volume. You just turn up the volume in the input gain on the clipper, and then when you do it that way, you won't be changing the depth plane structure that you've created. Okay, so that's it for today. That's all you need to know for that. So I'm sure this is going to help a lot of you out. So put it into practice and just, you'll find that you'll be able to make, super dynamic 3-dimensional drums with impact, even with aggression, through contrast like this. And you'll still be able to have them loud. So they'll be loud and dynamic. They won't be loud and flat anymore. But that depth plane structure is the first thing that you must do. So focus on that. All right, there's 2 things I advise you to do after this video. One is to book in a one-on-one mentorship session with me so I can take a look at anything that might be holding you back. Even one session is often enough to spot like a kind of, recurring thing that you're doing, or, could be a small little bottleneck that you kind of haven't noticed yourself in your productions. One session is often enough for me to spot that and send you on your way in a better direction so that you're making music more efficiently for 2026. And the second thing that I advise you to do is to join my Discord community. I built this for you guys. It's accessible via Patreon. That's just how, everything's run. But what we have in there is a group of wonderful producers, and you'll be able to have more accountability because you'll not only be able to join in our feedback live streams, but you'll also be surrounded by people who are leveling up at the same time. So you'll be in the right environment, because environment matters more than you realize. Okay, so thank you very much for watching today. Much love and respect. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out. Don't do anything I wouldn't. Ciao for now.